What's up, everybody? Welcome to our junior high interactive family experience. My name is Pastor Ethan. Thank you so much for participating today with the family. Now, I have something to celebrate with you today. Are you ready? Today, LakePoint Junior High is both on-site and online. You now have the option to join us on-site here at the church for in-person junior high. We are so excited to see your face. I mean, yes, you've seen mine every week on your screen, but I haven't seen yours. All I've seen is a camera and my friend Cody, who films me every week. So today, I get to see some familiar faces, and that makes me incredibly happy. Now, if you're planning to stay home and enjoy junior high at home, nothing is going to change for you in terms of content and how you're currently experiencing our interactive family experiences. But we do want to extend an invitation to you and the family to join us on site. If you have younger kiddos, the LakePoint Kids will be opening next week, June 27th for grades 1 to 5 students and July 4th for nursery, preschool, and JKSK. We can't wait to have you back. I know my two little kiddos are super excited to be back in the building. Our oldest, Etta, literally dances throughout the house all morning saying, "We're going to church, we're going to church, we're going to church," and then cries all the way across the parking lot and all the way home because she wants to stay at church. So, we want to give you a warm invitation to rejoin us on site as our family ministries reopen, and we cannot wait to see you. All right, let me tell you what you can expect for junior high today. We are going to fill out an online connection card, so parents, get your smartphones ready. We're going to have some friendly family competition. We're going to head into week 4, our final week of our series called What I Really Want. And then all throughout our teaching video today, we're going to pause and have some great discussions. Now, I just want to remind all of our parents watching this morning that you are the ones who will be leading those discussions today. And the discussion questions and those discussion guides can be found and downloaded from an email I sent out yesterday. You can also find them in our junior high Facebook group. If you didn't get that email or if you haven't joined our Facebook group, make sure you let me know so we can add you to our mailing list and send you an invite. That is the best way to do these interactive experiences, by leading those discussions with your student. And it's the entire reason why we do this every week, so that you can have a clearer window into the spiritual development of your student and to create a space where you're helping them grow into everything God created them to be. So, if you need to pause the video and go download those discussion guides, please do so now. We are about to get into our series, but before we do, we would love to hear from you. We want to stay connected and check in, and so we have something called the connection card where we can do that. The connection card is found right on the main page of the LakePoint app. It's also in the video description right below me. And so we would love if you would take the next 60 seconds to fill out the card. It's basically like signing our guest book and letting us know you were here. Thanks for completing the connection card and signing our guest book. Now, every week here at LakePoint Junior High, we have some friendly competition. And today we're going to participate in a challenge that involves a lot of teamwork. Here we go. All right, this challenge is called Team Masterpiece. The goal of the game is to draw what I tell you to draw as a team. Now, how do you draw something as a team? Well, it's actually quite difficult. what you're going to do is you're going to get any writing utensil or drawing utensil or painting utensil and tape as many pieces of string to the top of the drawing utensil as there are team members. So if it's you and a parent, you would tape 2 pieces of string to the top. Then each player picks up the end of the string that isn't attached to the drawing utensil and pulls so there's no slack in the string. Then you'll move the writing utensil over top a piece of paper and try to draw whatever I tell you to draw. So take the next few minutes to gather everything you need: tape, string, markers, paper, and then I'll start telling you what to draw. All right, how'd you do? Were you able to draw something that somewhat resembles those items? If you would let me know by taking the next 2 minutes to post a photo in our LakePoint Junior High Facebook group, we will have a Tim Hortons gift card for you. Or if you don't have Facebook, you can just email me at ethan@lakepoint.church. All right, we are gonna switch gears and head into the teaching portion of junior high. We're heading into week 4 of our series, and it's all about temptation. Check it out.
So when I was younger and in school, just like all of you, I remember this group of friends that I would hang out with all the time. We were so close. It was probably like 3 or 4 guys and probably 5 or 6 girls, and we were just like inseparable. And I remember we did everything together. We went to church together, we went to school together, we would hang out together on the weekends. I mean, we could not be pulled apart. And of course that means that the more time we spent together, I'm sure if you know, a lot of you know this, we would sometimes get into like little arguments. Well, there was one girl who she and I just kind of butted heads a lot. We were really close, but we didn't always see things the same way. And I remember this one time we got into this really, really intense argument to the point that she was yelling at me. And I didn't know how to take that because, you know, who likes to be yelled at, right? And I was so angry about it that later when me and a couple of the other friends in the group were talking about it, I was tempted to just start saying things about her that I knew would be hurtful. And when you think about that idea and talking about people behind their back, you know, I knew at the time that like that's not just something that you do. And I was tempted to do it, but I knew that it had potential to damage. But I think that I was so angry in the moment that I just let it go. And I said something about her that was really, really hurtful to one of my other friends. Well, fast forward a couple days later to the next time that we all saw each other, and she came straight up to me and confronted me about it and said, "Did you say this about me?" And there I was, stuck. And I think the worst part of it was when I realized how much I had hurt her with the thing that I had said to my other friend. It ended up splitting up our group for a little while. We had one group of us that took my side, the other group of us that took her side, and it just became this big, big mess. And I'll never forget that. You know, sometimes we want things that aren't necessarily great for us in the long run. And we call that temptation. Think of it like this. Temptation is the desire to do something we know might not be the best for us. As you get older, the kind of temptation you might be facing is so much more intense than the kind you dealt with when you were younger. Being tempted to take a cookie from the counter when your mom told you not to is small stuff, compared to being tempted to cheat or steal or lie or make a choice that could have big and painful consequences. As you get older, a lot of our temptations get bigger, and so do the consequences. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe the temptation you gave into wasn't the same as mine, but you probably know the feeling. You've given in and done something you knew wasn't good for you. And then Well, like me, you are probably wondering, what do I do next? Maybe we feel stuck after we've given in to temptation. We're stuck with feelings of guilt and embarrassment and defeat and shame. We worry what people will think if they find out what we've done. And if people do find out, we fear they'll never see us the same way again. Or maybe the opposite is true for us. We've heard all this stuff about how giving into temptation can be bad or wrong or awful, but if we're honest, we don't feel any of that. We don't really feel guilty at all. Maybe it's because we don't think what we did was wrong. Or maybe because we've been doing it for so long, we don't even know the difference anymore. Or maybe because everybody else acts like it isn't a big deal, we feel the same way. Now, whatever the reason, giving into temptation doesn't feel all that bad to us. Or maybe we get upset. We might blame other people for what we did. After all, that's easier than taking responsibility ourselves, right? Our friends made us do it. Our teacher gave us way too much to study for the test. That's a stupid rule we had to follow anyway. We look to blame everyone else but ourselves when we give in to a temptation. Maybe we try to hide what we did. We want to cover it up. We avoid the person who's upset with us. We make excuses for what we did or where we were. We might even lie to deny the whole thing. We will do whatever it takes to make sure nobody finds out. Why? Because we know what we did was wrong and we don't want to face the fallout. Each and every one of these feelings or responses when we give into temptation is normal. They're things we all might do, but the reality is they don't make things better. In fact, dealing with temptation in these ways usually makes things worse. So what do we do? When we've given into temptation, how are we supposed to respond? To start over, to change the path we're on? When it comes to temptation, what's the best thing we can do once we've given in? Well, to help us figure that out, we're going to talk about a guy named David. Believe it or not, David was one of the biggest heroes in the Bible. He lived before Jesus came to earth, and his story is documented in the part of the Bible called the Old Testament. Now, when we first meet David, he was just a shepherd boy, just a little boy. But by the time his story was through, God called him to so much more. He eventually became king, and God said he was a man after my own heart. That's pretty huge. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear all that, I think this David guy must have had it all together. He probably lived right, he never made mistakes, and he never gave in to the kind of temptations that would mess up the good things he had going on. But that's not exactly how David's story went. When David was king over Israel, he was doing a really great job. He was winning a ton of battles, his kingdom was growing, and his people really liked him. Basically, this dude was the greatest of all time, the GOAT! But things changed on one fateful night. David couldn't sleep, so he got up out of bed and wandered to the roof, and then he noticed a beautiful woman named Bathsheba bathing across the way. Okay, now I know it's getting a little PG-13 up in here. So when he saw Bathsheba, what did David do? I mean, this was a man after God's own heart. He was the chosen king of Israel and a leader everyone loved. So obviously he walked away, went back into his room, and nothing bad happened, right? Wrong. David actually invited Bathsheba over to hang out, and well, they gave into some temptations they definitely shouldn't have. Especially since Bathsheba wasn't David's wife. In fact, she was actually married to someone else completely. A man named Uriah who was out fighting in David's army. Talk about the drama. So after all this, did David tell anyone about what happened with Bathsheba? Did he apologize or try to make it right? No. He just pretended like it never happened. And for a while that seemed to work, but then Uriah came home and things got complicated. See, David was overcome with guilt and afraid Uriah would find out what happened, so David started doing what so many of us do when we give into temptation. He tried to keep his mistake a secret. He went so far as to have Uriah sent back out to the battle so that he might be killed and this whole thing would just go away. So just to keep this whole mess straight, temptation led David to sin with Bathsheba. Then the guilt, fear, and shame he felt led him to order the killing of Bathsheba's husband. Not good, right? David knew what he did was wrong. He knew he was making mistake after mistake after mistake, but he kept going. Why would he do that? Well, I think it was because David believed he had no way out. Maybe he thought he was stuck in the mess he'd made. He just didn't know how to change the story. And in the middle of that, David also felt really distant from God. We know that because he actually wrote about it in a passage from the book of Psalms in the Bible. There, David wrote that he felt a lot of the same feelings that I know I feel when I struggle with temptation. He used phrases like crushed and cast out and joyless to describe it. Is anybody with me? But here's what we also know to be true about David's story. It didn't end there. God didn't give up on him. He didn't abandon him. He didn't throw his hands in the air and say, well, David, you gave in to temptation. There's nothing I can do with you now, so that's it. David actually did a lot of great things after this part of his story, but in order to really go on with his life, David had to do one thing. He had to ask for God's forgiveness. In one of the Psalms, David wrote this prayer asking for God's forgiveness. Don't keep looking at my sins. Remove the stain of my guilt. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a loyal spirit within me. In other words, David prayed this: forgive me of my sins, God. Forgive me for giving into something I knew wasn't good for me. Help me get over the guilt I feel over what I've done. Change my heart. Help me to want to follow your ways instead of my own. Now, David still had to face some major consequences from those bad choices, but because he had forgiveness, he could walk forward without fear or guilt or shame holding him down anymore. He knew his story could start again, and the same can be true for us. See, giving into temptation doesn't have to be the end of the story. We don't have to stay stuck in the choices we've made or the feelings we feel because of them. Forgiveness was the key for David, and it's the key for you and me too. I told you a story of a friend who I said some pretty nasty things about. And what was really good was that it didn't end there. See, we're still friends to this day, and it's because in that moment when she confronted me and said, "Did you say this about me?" the only thing I could do was to say, "Yes. And I am so sorry. Obviously, that's not really how I feel about you. Obviously, that was something that I should not have done. I was just tempted in the moment, and I just owned it. I just owned up to her, and in humility, in the best way that I knew in my 14-year-old self, I said, I'm sorry. Will you forgive me?" And thankfully, she had enough grace. Not immediately. She was still pretty upset. But eventually, she had enough grace to say, I forgive you, and I love you, and we're still cool. You see what I mean? Giving into temptation doesn't have to be the end of the story. And that's because of forgiveness. So if you've found yourself wondering what to do next, if you're struggling with guilt or fear or shame after giving into a temptation, if you're finding yourself making mistake after mistake after mistake, well, a different story is possible. And here's how it starts. First, ask God for forgiveness. Go to God just like David did. Confess what it is that you're struggling with. Tell him about how it's made you feel. Ask for God's help to change your story and ask for his forgiveness. Remember, there's nothing that can separate you from God's love, and there's nothing he won't offer you his forgiveness for. So start by walking forward today and asking him for it. And then ask others to forgive you. Asking God for forgiveness is the most important step in moving forward, but making things right with others is important too. When we make poor choices, it often affects those around us. And part of moving on and moving forward is taking responsibility for the mistakes that we've made. When you disobey your parents, you need to admit what you did and ask them to forgive you. When you've lied to a friend, you need to ask for forgiveness. When you've spread that rumor you knew wasn't true, you need to be honest and ask for forgiveness. It's not fun, but it's important. And it's part of what will help you move on. And next, forgive yourself. Sometimes this can be the hardest step to take. Even when you know God has forgiven you and you've heard a friend say, I forgive you, you can't seem to forgive yourself. You beat yourself up and you worry that you'll mess up again. And when you get stuck here, keep reminding yourself of God's forgiveness. Ask for his help to remember that your story isn't over. And then make a new plan. If you don't want to find yourself in the same situation in the future, you've got to figure out what to do differently now. You've got to make a new plan to avoid that temptation. And that might mean making some tough choices, like not hanging out with certain friends, or having your parents put restrictions on your phone or your computer, or not listening to certain music, or asking to sit in a different seat in class. Whatever you need to do, do it. Make a new plan and consider telling somebody like your group leader about it. Ask them to help you stick to that plan and encourage you as you do. And remember, giving in to temptation doesn't have to be the end of the story. You got this.
As we conclude our series today, What I Really Want, we're focusing on forgiveness. When we give into temptation, we want to find forgiveness from God, from others, and from ourselves. But asking for that can be really difficult to do. For starters, it requires for us to be aware that we need to ask for it. And it also requires the humility to admit a mistake and for the courage to apologize for it. Both those things are challenging to do, even for most adults. But the goal today is to encourage you to start developing the skill of asking for forgiveness. It's something that will take time and lots of practice. Even I'm still learning how to do it well. But I know you can do it. Remember, the goal of apologizing isn't to get you out of trouble or move you away from consequences. The goal is to receive the forgiveness you need to help you start over on a new path. So, how in the world do you do that? Well, when we give into temptation, we can start new by asking God for forgiveness and talking to Him about what we're struggling with. We can ask others to forgive us by taking responsibility of our actions and apologizing. And then we can forgive ourselves and remind us that we aren't defined by our behavior and our different temptations. And I think the best way to do all of that is to make a plan. Make a plan for when you face temptation in the future. Write out how you're going to respond and who you need to talk to. Remember, giving into temptation doesn't have to be the end of the story. Thanks for participating today, everyone. I hope you spent some time today as a family and talked through some discussion questions and had some great conversation today. Now, before you go, remember to post a photo of your family participating in our LakePoint Junior High Facebook group, and you could be the winner of a Tim Hortons gift card. To close our time, take the next 2 minutes to pray together as a family, and then head to the LakePoint app to access our weekday devotionals that go along with our series. You'll find them in the family resources section, and you can also find them in the video description right below me. Have a wonderful week, friends. We'll see you next week online or on site.